Hello everyone, welcome back to my gaming review. Today I want to talk about Nintendo Switch Online and why, in my opinion, I just don't think it's that good of a thing. So basically, if you pay for the online for Nintendo Switch or whatever, you can play NES games, SNES games, and apparently they're bringing Nintendo 64 games to Switch Online. However, I hate Nintendo Switch Online, and I'll give you my reasons why I hate Nintendo Switch Online. Number one, I think that Nintendo should just bring NES, SNES, and 64 games to the Switch, but I think people should be allowed to actually buy the games and actually choose the games they want for the system. So if you see Super Mario Bros. 1 for the original Nintendo, you can buy it and play it on your Nintendo Switch. When the 64 games come out, you can get like, Mario Kart 64, and you just have to buy the game. I don't like Nintendo Switch Online because, again, it's, online based. Um, Without a Wi-Fi internet connection, you cannot play your NES, SNES collection of games that you have. And they're only free, well, not really free, but they're only available if you pay for the membership and the subscription. For me, I would rather just buy the Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64 games for the Nintendo Switch. I think the online, I think Nintendo Switch Online is terrible, and I think that one day, because, what happens if Nintendo makes a brand new game console, right? And they stop supporting the Nintendo Switch. That means that your NES, SNES, and 64 games for the Nintendo Switch Online would no longer be available in the future when they jump to the next console, because just like the 3DS, they're going to shut down the eShop. Just like the Wii, they're going to shut down the Nintendo eShop. So in my opinion, it's kind of like pointless. I mean, it's, it's good for right now, but what happens in the future when Nintendo pulls the plug on the Switch, right? And I just think that Nintendo Switch Online is just, you know, I used to have a Nintendo Switch. I would play my Nintendo Switch and all that, but for me personally, I would rather buy my NES and Super Nintendo and 64 games on the Nintendo Switch. That's just me. Maybe similar people agree, but I think that it would be cool if they could like make a NES collection for Switch, or the SNES collection, or 64 collection for Nintendo Switch. Instead of having to pay for the online service, they could have like game cartridges that have like a collection of like old school retro games that you can play on your Switch. I think that would be very interesting and cool to do. I think Nintendo could also put 64 and NES and Super Nintendo games on the eShop separately. You can actually buy those games. So you do not need to have Nintendo Online just to play them. Because, it sucks when, let's say you have a Nintendo Switch, right? And you want to play your NES collection of games, your SNES collection. Let's say that you are on vacation, or you are leaving your house, right? And you have no Wi-Fi connection. Then your games are unplayable and unusable. And that's my biggest issue with it, is that with Nintendo Online, you have to have online. It's in the name. So let's say that you're in a location that has no internet access, where your games become useless, basically. Or if it's the future and Nintendo no longer supports the Nintendo Switch, then you still can't play these games. So that's basically why I have an issue and a problem with this online service. And it's kind of the same thing with the Xbox. It's kind of like that online DRM. It's a requirement, and it shouldn't be a requirement because, in my opinion, every game console ever needs to have an offline option, and you should be able to actually play games and enjoy games offline. you should be able to enjoy video games without needing all these requirements, that we need nowadays, like for Xbox, you need this and that and this just to play Xbox games. For Nintendo Online, you have to actually pay for the online services, and you have to actually be connected to online. And with the Xbox and Nintendo, if you lose your internet connection, or you go somewhere that has no internet, your Xbox and Switch are basically useless. I mean, you can still use your Nintendo Switch offline, but you can't play, the NES and Super Nintendo games because they're only on the online service to play these games. And that's my biggest issue with gaming at the moment. Not with PlayStation, but my biggest issue is with the Xbox and Nintendo stuff and how they're handling these games. PlayStation, you can play games all offline on PlayStation. PlayStation, you can play offline, completely offline, and everything works fine, right? But with Nintendo and Xbox, everything's a lot more online based. Obviously, with the Switch, you can play any Switch game and game cartridge completely offline. But when it comes to the NES and Super Nintendo, and then the 64 games that are coming out for the online service, you have to have a connection just to play these retro games, and it really shouldn't be that way. It's cool to play games online. I'm not saying that it's a bad or negative thing, but what I'm saying is that these games should have offline. These games should be able to work completely offline if you don't have access to your Wi-Fi connection. You should be able to still play your games. And that's my major issue with Xbox and Nintendo Switch Online, is that these retro games on Nintendo, you have to have internet connection. It's not that way with all games on Switch, but it is that way with the collections of games you get. Like the Nintendo, it's the NES Online collection that you can have in the Super Nintendo. But these games are not actually your games, which is the other issue. Just because you are paying for the online services, these games you're playing, they're not really your games. I mean, you can't play them offline or anything. You have to be connected, to internet just to play them. And in the far future, you won't be able to play these games at all when Nintendo stops supporting the Switch. Just like the 3DS, just like Nintendo Wii, they're going to do it with the Switch one day, where these games are just completely unusable. You'll still be able to use physical games, but when it comes to Switch's, online games, the NES and Super Nintendo, I want to be very clear, not all digital games on Switch are like that. It's not like the Xbox, but it's a little bit like the Xbox with the online service, where, some of these games, some of these retro games, you have to have internet connection to just play them, which I think is dumb. But anyway, with that stuff being said, I'm going to end this video. That is just my opinion and my thoughts on Nintendo Online. But I hope everyone has a lovely day or night, and peace out.